Well, I am very happy to welcome to the live stream my friend Brock Meier. Brock and his wife Roxana live in Bulverde, Texas, which, if you don't know your Texas geography, is in the greater San Antonio area. And he's speaking to us from his home today. How you doing, Brock?
I'm great. Happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, okay, so I'm trying to remember, and I'm from faulty memory, as to how I think we might have initially connected by email, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's correct.
What happened is that Brock sent me an email and said, I've sort of written a book that you've played a part in. And as it turns out, my song "Man of the Tombs" actually was part of the soundtrack that sort of helped. I think helped the process along a little bit. Is that how it worked out?
Yeah, that's right. I became a believer back in 1977. Give you a little bit of an idea of how old I am. But early on in reading through the Word, I was just captured by the story of, as you call him, the man of the tombs. Some people call the Gadarene demoniac. And I've never been demonically possessed. However, there's something about that man's life that just really touched me and somehow I identified with. And years later, when I first heard your song, that just really added a depth of humanity to that man that captured me even more. And I thought, sooner or later, I'm going to have to do something with that story.
Now, what led you to, I mean, in a sense, you sort of wrote the novel backwards from the conclusion of the story of the Gadarene demoniac, but I'm so interested in how you made, what led you to the interest in the Nabateans, to Petra, to that regional world, to that culture. What made you and led you to sort of write the story backwards to that starting point?
I think how that happened was that the story itself takes place on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And that area was known at that time as the Decapolis, the 10 cities. Gadara being one of them, which is why the guy's called the Gadarene demoniac.
Uh-huh.
So I'm thinking, well, maybe this guy was from Gadara, a Gadarene. And as I looked more and more into it, I found out that that region had, not all the time, but off and on, had been controlled by the kingdom of Nabatea. And if you don't know exactly where that is, it's pretty much everything to the east of the Jordan River. Judea was on the west. Their neighbors to the east side of the river were the Nabateans. Well, I didn't know anything about Nabatea. I had heard that Petra was the capital of Nabatea. That's about all I knew. And really, most of what I knew is from that Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade. That one scene where they're riding back down what's called the Seek, that big crack in the rocks that leads to what's called the treasury in Petra. That's all I knew about Nabatea. But I started looking into it, and the more and more I researched it, the more I became fascinated with who those people were as a people group. It's just really an amazing story of who they were, who they became, and what happened to them.
And
so I thought maybe this would make a great story.
To me, the novel reads like it's written by a fellow for whom this has been a lifelong passion. And kind of what you're telling me, which seems very counterintuitive, is that relatively speaking, you kind of came to this enthusiasm and this knowledge kind of late in the game, right?
Oh yeah, just a few years ago. But when I got into it, it was just so fascinating that I really love to study things to begin with. I really like to look into all the details. So as soon as I started finding out who they were, I just immersed myself in archaeological studies and epigraphical studies and all that, and learned a tremendous amount. So, yeah, it was pretty late in
Well,
life that I got into it, but I just devoured
what
it.
little bit I know about you personally, and our friendship is growing each time we have encounters, but you don't seem like a halfway kind of guy. So the fact that you dove in and did as much research and got down and forgive me if I'm
It's kind of a blessing and a curse. Truth be known.
and I mean I hope I'm not doing a spoiler alert here by saying this, but I mean that makes it all the more impressive that for someone who has come to this research and this knowledge, crafted the story in a way that you have. And it's not just, oh, what a nice thing this guy made. This book is now winning historical awards for not only the drama of the storytelling, but the accuracy and attention to detail. That's pretty fabulous.
There's one other little piece of the puzzle, too, that I need to mention here. I just thought of. Uh, Not only was it that there might be a connection between Nabatea and the Gadarene demoniac, but there's a puzzling little part of the life of the Apostle Paul that is talked about in the book of Acts and also in a couple of his letters. And it's known that right after his conversion on the road to Damascus, and after he initially went into the city of Damascus, he left and went into the word that's used in the Greek, which the New Testament was written in, was Arabia. But that also was an alternate word at that time for Nabatea. So if you read a lot of scholars' different looks at all those little pieces where Paul talks about it and where Luke talks about it, he spent anywhere between the first 1 up to maybe 3 years in Nabatea. So the question is, why was he there? What was he doing there? So Paul actually figures in to the later portions of the book. He's not a major character, but he does have a part to play in a couple of chapters.
Now, so the protagonist is Nahor, and I mean, okay, I wrote this down because I thought it was amazing. Because I have a couple craft questions which I must insert. First of all, when in your writing process itself, and we'll get to the story, but when in the writing process itself, are you one of those guys who sort of writes in a discipline, or do you write by inspiration? Is it a combination of both? There's a famous quote, I forget who the author was. Somebody asked him whether he wrote on a schedule or whether he wrote by inspiration. And he said, I write by inspiration, and inspiration comes every morning at 9:00. And that was his answer. So what is your process when you're on the hunt and writing?
Writers talk about either being an outliner or being a pantser, writing by the seat of the pants.
Uh-huh.
And the latter is pretty much what I am. But often the way it works is that I spend a great deal of time not even thinking about writing, but just filling myself with all the groundwork, all the stuff of what might eventually enter into a story. So I just consume a lot of that stuff. And I rarely outline at all. And then once I get all filled up with that stuff, I just start writing. And I rarely start writing from the beginning. I just start writing little pieces and parts as they come to me. And in the end, it all kind of fits together and fills it all out.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know exactly how to explain how that happens. I guess you could say that's by inspiration. But that's kind of how it works.
Obviously there's discipline involved because to take in that much research and that much background material, and then say I'm going to let this seep into the writing process. That's work that just has to be done, and you're doing it.
But for me, it's not really. I don't consider it work. To me, it's play.
Uh-huh.
Here I am, a 73-year-old retired guy. I just recently, this past year, retired from my 50-year career as a research scientist and engineer. And I love my job there. But I love this even more. When I get immersed in doing this, whether it's research or whether it's the quote work of writing, to me, it's just all an incredible joy.
Now, you've got, by my count, and it depends on how you do it, you've got 411 pages of storytelling with a total of 427 pages with an afterword, some appendix, a timeline, that sort of thing. Were there any scenes that you left on the cutting room floor, so to speak?
I think there is one chapter that I didn't put in there.
Uh-huh. That'd be kind of a fun thing if it's actually, like release worthy. It'd be fun to tell people, when you read this novel, when you get between chapter 20 and 21, here's what might have happened.
That's a good idea. I might publish that sometime as kind of an extra giveaway.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we're not doing DVDs too much anymore unless you're a film student, but that's one of the things that the directors will say all the time on the comments is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I had to cut out because of pacing or because I restated the same thing and the other thing here. But then sometimes you can watch those deleted scenes on the DVD. So it would be sort of the literary equivalent of a deleted scene.
Right. Yeah, I'm not even sure why I didn't put that chapter in there. Because as I recall, I really liked it. But I think it was more an idea of, I was kind of exploring two of the characters' character and just trying to flesh that out a little bit and more for myself, figure out who they were. So I kind of had a chapter of a certain interchange between them. And maybe I should have actually put that in there now that I think about it.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that.
It may have been just kind of an oversight that I left it out.
Yeah. So it's extremely difficult, and it may be an impossible task for me to ask you to summarize a detailed and rich novel. But if you were to give somebody what we used to call the elevator pitch explanation for The Stonecutter, how would you describe the story that you're telling?
Of course, as a writer, I'm supposed to have this 30-second pitch down.
That's okay.
But I'm not very good at 30-second pitches. But I'll give it my best.
No. We have a little more than 30 seconds.
It's the story is very familiar to a lot of people if you're familiar with the Gospels. So I won't go too much into that. But the story of this guy's life in general is he has a pretty troubled and difficult childhood because he's implicated in the deaths of both his younger sister and his mother. And because of that, his father abandons him in a city not his own. So he grows up kind of as an orphan or at least foster child of a man who is a well-known sculptor in the capital city of Petra. So he has this thing of where, he's looking for belonging all his life. Mm-hmm. He's looking for family. He's looking for love. As he becomes a young professional, he translates that into looking for acclaim and success.
Uh-huh.
But through various means, that profession is cut short, and he can no longer pursue it. but he comes to believe that there's something out there, this kind of mythical object. I didn't invent this object. It's called the shamir. If you look it up on the internet, you'll find a lot of stuff about it. It supposedly could cut stone. It was a little device. People describe it very precisely. It could cut stone with its mere glance. Some people said it was used to engrave the gemstones in the breastplate of the high priest. Some people say that this thing was used by Solomon to cut the stones for the first temple. That's why there was no sound of stone cutting on the Temple Mount. But anyway, this guy in Nabatea hears about this, and he spends much of his life pursuing this object, and ends up getting involved with evil powers, and his life degrades from there and goes down and down, and he ends up in a very sorry state in which you encounter him in the Gospels. And that's not the end of the story. Once he's delivered, as you read about in the Gospels, it's not the end of the story. That's probably 3/4 of the way through the novel.
Yeah.
You find out that being delivered isn't the end of it for any of us. Being rescued by the Lord Jesus is only the beginning, really. And your life is not a simple, straight arc from there on out. There's a lot of twists and turns and difficulties and pain and all that. But in the end, it's a glorious thing.
Does some of the post deliverance that you're talking about make up the story material for the next two books? The Stonecutter is part one of Waters in the Desert trilogy, and so do some of the characters and situations carry forward into either of the forthcoming books?
Some people actually write a series so that it's chronological, and you're reading a long epic story from beginning to end. But that's not really how my own series is going to work. I say that it's a series that's going to have 7 novels in it. My wife keeps telling me, "Bill, don't say 7 novels. That's a lot of work. You really sure you're going to get there?" Who knows? Maybe I won't get to 7, but I have 7 books planned out, and they will all take place in the 1st century Nabatean kingdom, and some of the characters will overlap or show up, have cameo roles here and there, but it's not so much a trilogy where I'm continuing on directly with the same characters.
So even though they might be related, theoretically you'll be able to read each one as a standalone story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The next novel looks at the life of an actual real person, just as the first novel was. Her name is Shakilat, and she was the second queen of King Haratat, the king of the Nabateans at that time. Paul also speaks briefly of King Haratat, who, as it turns out, was the guy who was after him the second time Paul was in Damascus, and that's why he had to escape from Damascus through that window in the wall of the city, lowered to the ground in a basket at night. So that novel will look at a possible connection between a meeting between Queen Shakilat and Paul when he was in Arabia or Nabatea, and what was Paul about in Nabatea that got the king of Nabatea so enraged with him that he went all the way to Damascus to arrest Paul. There's all kinds of interesting little things in Scripture that you can kind of breeze through it's only briefly mentioned, maybe one sentence, and you think, wow, what's that about? So that's kind of a lot of the things that I'm picking up in order to continue this series.
And one of the things that you did, when I wrote the song Man of the Tombs, I wasn't really thinking directly about, I want to portray this man and my connection to him. It was a lot more of a visceral kind of connection at the time. My life has fallen apart.
Right.
I'm going through this horrible divorce. I feel like I've wrecked everything in my life. I mean, I open up my Bible and I'm playing Bible roulette, and I open up the story to the Gadarene demoniac, and I say to myself in the room where I'm alone and can say anything I want, oh my God, this is me. And what I related to, as you alluded to in the beginning of our conversation, to the best of my knowledge, there's been no demon possession. I mean, there have been oppressive times where I felt like it's a little dark in here for me. But what drew me to the story was his distrust of anybody, his isolation, his self-harm, his he had given up on himself. I mean, you don't get much more explicit than living in a graveyard, especially in that culture.
Right.
That kind of that's a big giant clue that he's in trouble.
Right.
And so, that was my relation to him, was to saying, oh my God. And then eventually when I thought about it more, I thought, we always think of this guy in what I call, for the cinematic reference, I call exorcist terms. We think of the deliverance, we think of the demons, we think of how dramatic that must have been. But what we forget is just the sheer humanity of the guy, flesh and blood guy, pant leg, one leg at a time. Well, maybe not in that culture, but you know what I mean. Just a guy, except for the differences in history and culture and experience, he's made out of the same flesh and blood that we are. He's just a guy.
Exactly.
And he's got himself in trouble, and he's capable of not. He may not be a monster, but he's capable of monstrous things,
right.
And thoughts.
And I
didn't mean to completely. I didn't mean to completely ask and answer the question in one sequence, but so I felt such a resonance in the way that you approach the story, and I'll stop talking now.
And I think that's very much the connection that I had. Just like I said much earlier here, I was never directly demonic possessed, even though in my previous life, before I knew the Lord, I certainly was toying around with very evil directed things in my life. And I think that was the same connection that I had as you did, that you can find yourself in a very difficult, problematic place due to your own choices and desires, and find yourself even at the point of self-harm, doing things to yourself in your life that can be destructive to you. Yeah. And I think those are the things that I saw in his human existence that connected with me. And then when you kind of very much more flesh that out, saying, this is a real guy who lived a real life. He's just like everybody else. That's the thing that touched me. And I just wanted to even do more of that.
Well, and I'm so honored to have played a part in that. I mean, and what I always tell people is, once the songs get out there and the recordings get out there, I can be having a depressed day in my bathrobe and the songs are still out there somewhere doing something. It's a good thing that they don't need me at a certain point. Yeah. But I mean,
and that's something that in my own writing, here I am, a kind of an old guy here towards the end of my life. hopefully I've got a lot more time to go. My dad is still going strong at 102, so who knows? Maybe I've got 30 years left. But
Man.
sooner or later, yeah, my body's going to turn to dust as well. And, maybe this book will outlive me and people will be able to pick it up in the future and read it and hear something that I left behind.
That is, I don't know if we've had this discussion before, but it's a very sweet thing to hear because for years, I've had, just like writing a song, I've had an answer to a question that I've answered the same way for like 30 years. People say, what's your favorite song? And I will tell them, I don't have a favorite song. It would be like picking a favorite child or something. But if you ask me, what is the one song that you hope gets heard by the most amount of people and outlives you? It would be Man of the Tombs. And so you, without even, I don't even think you know that story, and saying the exact same thing about the book, I just feel that much more kinship with with you, if that's possible. Wow. Well, I'm so appreciate you taking a little bit of time to chat with us about this. I'm going to put a better graphic on here, but I wanted to hold up the book, The Stonecutter. This is my copy, and I'm so just, as obviously, I mean, I tell people when I tell this story, I said I have a friend who dedicated a book to me, and that's the first and the last time that's ever going to happen to me. And it's just such an honor. And but not only because I have a footnote in the creation of the book, but just as a reader, I just appreciated your storytelling, your attention to detail, your compassion and understanding of the characters that you wrote, even the troubled ones. As a fellow practitioner of storytelling, you did such a wonderful job in long form. What I try to do 3.5, 4 minutes at a time. And so it was just a pleasure and an honor to read the book, and thank you so much for only you and the Lord and Roxana know all the sacrifices that went into behind the scenes to get this thing done. People can see the end product, but they sometimes don't have any idea what it takes to get there, and it takes a lot.
And I've just been very honored as well to make a connection with you personally through this book. It's something that, many years ago when I first started to hear your own work and just really became immersed in that, I never thought that one day I would be sitting here talking to you because your own ability to tell stories. And I'm just blown away by how, in a simple song of a few minutes, something of a powerful story can come across. The economy in which you can tell a story just totally blows me away. So I'm honored to know you as a fellow artist, and most of all, as a brother in the Lord. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Brock. I appreciate you talking with me today, and hope we can introduce a lot of people to the story and the book. It's available in all the usual places. I'll put the Chiron up on the screen so you can see it, but the website is brockmeierauthor.com, and I'll get you the spelling and all that so you get to the right place. But you can go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and do it that way as well. But you can keep up with his adventures on the website. And just thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.